going to talk about some of the challenges going on, both kind of in the economy and particularly some challenges for sales teams. Talk a little bit about prioritization and making sure that we really keep our priorities, focus on our priorities during these times, setting clear expectations. Whenever there's challenges, it's a good opportunity to go back and revisit. Are we really being clear on what we expect our teams to do? How do we deal with underperforming sales reps? How do we really motivate them, manage them, get them really focused on the right behaviors to drive results? And as part of that, we're still working for the most part in a hybrid world. Many companies are still either doing hybrid work or still see a lot of work from home. Some people returning to the offices. The techniques we're going to share will work both in person and hybrid. I want to just make sure that we're really keeping people optimistic and moving forward. I'll ask Alonzo to kind of monitor the chat. We have some questions. We can take them along the way. We're happy to take questions. We also would love your participation. We have a couple of polls, a couple of engagements built in, and we'll try and leave some time for Q&A at the end as well. So with that, let me get into just some of the challenges that we're kind of seeing in the economy, and probably that all of you are seeing and we all read about or hear about in the news every day. So the first one is really supply chain issues, and that has a number of implications. Certainly, they have implications on sales teams when you cannot deliver on time, on schedule. There are disruptions. Also creates a lot of disruption in terms of, if you think about construction industries or industries where they're very dependent on parts and those parts are not coming in. I think there was something like that, Lisa, I just saw on computer chips. Companies weren't able to manufacture because there was some global shortage of computer chips.
That's right.
Labor shortages. We have more openings. I'm still seeing this. There's like 1.7 job openings for every person that's looking for work. And that doesn't mean that every person's looking for work is even qualified. So if you just think about that, there's just a lot more openings currently. So even though some companies are starting to have some layoffs or some job freezes, the macro picture is still that companies are hiring. Inflation has gone crazy. I don't know the last time everyone went to the grocery store or went to fill up their tank, but the prices are sky high. They're probably at decade high levels, couple of decade high levels. I think maybe the highest in 20 years. We've got in the United States a Federal Reserve that's trying to fight that by raising interest rates, but the inflation is still really stubborn. But when you raise inflation rates, interest rates, it has a ripple effect. If you think just about housing, the housing market is now really under a lot of pressure. Mortgage rates have really doubled in the last few months. And then we've got this implication called the Great Resignation, and it started during the pandemic. People started to really revisit, is this exactly what I want to do? Do I want to take some time off? Do I want to look for another job? Obviously, there's a lot of jobs available. And then we more recently, and Lisa was elaborating to me as we were talking about this webinar, about quiet quitting. And that was a new one to me. But Lisa, do you want to share with us what you're referring to?
Yeah, some people look at quiet quitting as a situation where the organization has put so much pressure on the incumbents in the organization to perform that they're burning out or they're not on board with the direction of travel for the organization. So they're just, in effect, basically just going through the motions. And we used to call it quitting and staying. Call it quiet quitting now, and it has some other dynamics to it that are a direct output of what happened during the pandemic. And the talent issue that we're all wrestling with as leaders has never been more difficult than it is today.
And I think about these are kind of what I would call macro issues and macro challenges based on the economy. But then within sales teams, we have some very specific challenges. And, we did a blog post, and Alonzo was reminding me of this a while ago about, over-reliance on sales stars. And we started to look at that. And I think it's really true today because you could lose a top performer to the competition. You can lose a top performer deciding they want to do something else with their career. Business has been really spotty. I know like in our business, we can have some really, really large quarters, a couple of quarters that are a little bit softer. It kind of averages out over time. But if you're working in a publicly traded company where you're really reliant on quarterly numbers and one or two of your top performers has a bad quarter, that's going to have a huge implication on your forecasts. It also creates a little bit where if someone's underperforming, they can say, okay, well, Lisa's going to bail us out. She's going to have this monster quarter. But that's not always the case. And why should those people be able to underperform? It's not just a matter, whenever I evaluate a sales team, I also look at the percentage of overall team members that make quota, not just did the team hit quota, because one or two people can really carry the weight for a whole team. But if they have a team of 7 people, did like 5 of those people make quota, or like did 2 of those people make quota? And also, I think as a manager, we have a responsibility to help teams reach their full potential. We don't want to just have, even if we could get by with just 1 or 2 superstars, that doesn't feel very good. That doesn't say much about our management ability. It says something about their sales ability. But our management ability is really based on moving the middle and even bringing up some of those underperformers. Lisa, you've managed sales teams for as long as I have. I'm just curious your view on this.
Oh, it's a live dynamic. I'm not sure that there's been a given year as a sales leader that I haven't had this issue, because there's always somebody that's outperforming the others. But then what do you do, as you mentioned, about the folks that are underperforming or not quite where they should be? Today, this issue in the organization that I'm in is exacerbated by the previous slide, what we were talking about, what's happening in the marketplace. So is the underperformance of some of my salespeople related to turnover in the workplace? Is it related to some of the operational issues? Is it related to some of the global supply chain issues? And I just happen to have an overachieving salesperson that isn't as affected by it. So these are all of the things I have to take into consideration today that are different from times past.
Great. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm looking in the chat. I'm just going to see if we had something here. Okay. And Alonzo, if you'll just monitor the chat for us, if you see anything that results in a question you'd like us to speak to, feel free to interrupt, and we'd be happy to speak to anything that comes up in the chat. I want to get back to our agenda for a minute. So we talked about some of the challenges, at the macro level and also for sales teams. And whenever there's challenges, we should really kind of reset priorities. And I think that during the course of the pandemic, we were managing with a lot of empathy, and we should always manage with empathy. But I think that we don't want the ability to show empathy to necessarily interfere with priorities. And we can do both at the same time. We can be empathetic, but we can also really have a culture of accountability. And as the economy, maybe gets a little bit more challenging, we're going to have to make sure that our teams really are accountable. And generally, I think people don't mind being held accountable as long as it's done in a very fair and balanced way. So I'm going to share with you some high-level thoughts that I'm going to ask Lisa to elaborate based on some work they've done in this area at GP Strategies. But here's some of the, what I would call some of the basics. Really establish clear performance expectations. Salespeople want to know what's expected of them. And, sometimes we think we're clear, but we're not that clear. Ask the salesperson, hey, I just want to make sure we're clear. Can you just tell me, what your expectations or what the expectations are for this quarter? It may be that we said something and they picked up on something else, and there's no reason for ambiguity. We might as well get that on the table. We want to focus on activities that drive results. Sometimes we get so hyper-focused on results that we forget that results are backwards looking. We're going to come back and talk on that some more, but a result's something that's already happened in the past. What we really want to focus on is the activities we control. And particularly when we look at that slide on the economy, there are things that are outside of our control, like the supply chain, like the inflation rates, which results in price increases. So it's really important we focus on what we can control. Everyone has performance gains. Maybe that's a mistake that I don't have it on the slide here, but gains are things that people are doing better than expected. The first thing we should do is we should really reinforce what's doing well. My partner, Ray Makla, often says, let's catch him doing something right. So I apologize for the omission there. Let's really focus first on performance gains. Then let's really look at where the gaps are. And everyone has gaps. And gaps are simply a way of saying an area for improvement. But we don't always understand what's the cause of a performance gap. Is it something that they can directly control, something beyond their control? So we want to learn how to analyze what's really going on beneath the surface. What actions can we take as a manager? And, in our training programs, we talk about 10 different actions managers can take. And quite often that's a light bulb that they didn't really think about. I've got all these different tools in my toolbox I can use to help my sales team. And then communicating the vision. People want to be part of something where there is a vision. They want to understand not just what their job is, but how it relates to the sum of the parts and how, really what's the organizational vision. And sharing that and communicating that's really important. And I was thinking, Lisa, when we were discussing this topic, you mentioned a lot about competence and connection, and really as it relates to sharing the vision. So I'd love you to just elaborate on that. I know that your GP Strategies has done some research in this area. So if you could you just speak to that for us?
Sure, absolutely, Norman. So the intent of creating a culture of accountability is really all about driving results, right, Norman? So in order to get to those results, we need our leaders to inspire and drive to those results. What our research has told us is that oftentimes many of these leaders are promoted based on their competence, their institutional knowledge, their experience, their effectiveness in getting the technical aspects of their job completed effectively. What they aren't necessarily bringing into a leadership role is the skills of human connection, the ability to inspire. So I use those terms very deliberately when I was talking about driving results. It's not just the drive part, it's the inspire part too. And the inspirational piece of it comes from the skills of human connection. If you're not able to gain trust from your sales team, if you're not able to understand the nuances of what they might be personally contending with and how you adjust, how you coach them and engage with them on a sales call, if you're not listening to what their aspirations are and how to develop them in role, these are things that are really important to getting to the results that you're looking for. Striking that balance between competence and connection is really key.
I think the connection piece is super important. I know, like in our sales coaching program, whenever they ask me what's the number one attribute to be a great sales coach, I often say building trust, because when you have that, your salesperson's trust that you really have their best interest in mind, not just your organizational interest, but their best interest in mind. They know that the advice is coming from a good place. They know that you're there to help them, that you have their back, that you're there not to criticize them, but to really help them improve in certain areas. That trust is the foundation for a coaching culture. Obviously, people are emotionally intelligent, are really good listeners. They use active listening skills. So there's a lot here that I think really goes into how we manage and particularly how we coach our teams. And, as an aside, we did a research paper with Selling Power a number of years ago, and we came up with the, attributes of what really matters most in terms of sales results. And I think there was 400 sales leaders that were involved in that. You can certainly put in research paper in the chat if you want to get a copy of that from us. Be happy to send it to you. But the number one thing was sales coaching, and the fundamental aspect of sales coaching is around emotional intelligence and building trust. So really interesting. So Alonzo mentioned this is going to be interactive, and I want to just get everyone here participating in the next poll that's going to come up. So here's a poll. And we think about, areas for improvement. Just think about if you're a manager for yourself, or if you are in sales enablement or training and development professional, what you see in your team. What is the greatest area for improvement? So let's go ahead and launch the poll. Is it establishing clear performance expectations, focusing on the underlying activities that drive results, taking appropriate management actions, or communicating the vision? So I'm just curious. We'll just do a quick straw poll. And Alonzo, can we go ahead and launch that? Give it a minute here. There it is. So while we're, Lisa, without biasing the poll, I'm just curious what your take on this is.
Yeah, and my answer to this question would have been different pre-pandemic than it is now. So while most organizations are going to say, gosh, we've got to get back to pre-COVID performance levels. And so they're probably all focusing on driving results, which is that second response there. But, quite honestly, communicating the vision is where I would land. And again, not trying to bias the poll, but simply this is personal take. Because during the pandemic, I was all about, I don't care what sale it is, just get the sale, because we needed to recover during that time. But now I want to build for the future. So I want to make sure that I am, as a leader, effectively communicating where we're trying to go and getting their buy-in to that.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and we'll share the results. Let me share the results here. And you could see that a lot of our participants really agreed with you on communicating the vision. I think roughly 30% of the participants thought that was really important. A little bit over 30% on activities that drive results. That's kind of where I would always focus, is kind of on the key behaviors. No right or wrong answers here. They're all important. Performance expectations, great opportunity to reset the expectations. And sometimes as managers, we just don't take the action. So it's really just good to get this feedback. I'm not seeing any one area that really stands out, maybe a little bent towards the vision, which we'll talk about some more. We talk about how to motivate a team, and a little bit about the behaviors that drive results. So thank you all for participating. We had a really nice participation in that last poll, and I will close that poll. So I'm just curious, if we think we're going to go to a chat here, doesn't mean that our list is conclusive. We have a lot of really experienced people on the call with us today on this, participating. I'm just curious, just go ahead and type in the chat, type to everyone, what other management actions drive performance? So many of you are managing teams or have exposure. What do you think are some of the other actions that are really important for driving performance? And I'm just going to ask everyone to take a minute, type in a couple of words, and we'll take a look at some of the responses. And Alonzo, along the way, we'll have a number of people are looking for the research papers. So if we can just kind of keep tabs, we'll try and send them our research. I'll say setting clear goals and expectations. Jonathan, great. Anthony, leading by example. I'm going to put my glasses so I can read these. You mean positive performance or any? We definitely mean positive performance. We want to see positive performance. Olga put in one really like it, positivity, which is really bringing that very positive attitude. People want to work for management. Commitment, culture. Lisa, I know you guys do a lot of work around culture and helping your clients build great cultures. Think Alonzo has shared the report link, so anybody who wants to report. Effective coaching, Isaac, really good. I love sales coaching. I recommend it anytime someone signs up for a sales training program. I say, are you going to make sure the managers can coach to the program? Recognition, Shannon, that's a great form of motivation to really recognize and thank people. Stephen put empathetic and coaching, consistent reinforcement. Okay, consistency is really important. As managers, we have a million distractions. Salespeople aren't easy to manage. We have customer issues. We have fulfillment issues. Brad put one in here that I just love. And Lisa, maybe you can comment. He wrote, being authentic. Can you tell me what that means to you?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about authenticity, this has become a real prevalent sort of trend, I suppose is the right word for leaders today. Is who would have ever thought you had to sort of decide that you were going to be authentic instead of being more scripted? But for us, it really just comes down to, are you really showing your genuine self? Are you showing up with who you are as a person so that you can engender that, again, that connection, that ability to show that you're not a robot, that you're not just doing corporate speak, that you really are a person in there that they can relate to?
Yeah, and I think this is something that we can all work on. I remember when I was first doing these webinars, take myself back 7, 8, 9 years ago, I rely heavily on notes. And I realized that even though there's a point I may miss by not having all the notes in front of me, just the ability to sit here and have a conversation and just kind of share with you what we're thinking is so much more authentic in the way it comes across. So I do think that comes across when you talk to people on the phone. Also, in terms of building trust, I think Olga just put that in. Another is really being present and, making sure that, particularly if you're managing with a video camera, do you have your video camera on? Are you looking at the person? And is it getting 100% of your focus? Or are you spending time checking your text messages and doing other things that really take away? So I would also say just actively listening without distractions, letting people know you really care, and making sure you understand, their perspective. The managers don't have all the actions. We learn a lot from our teams. I think about sometimes, just going back to coaching, someone might, ask a manager, how do I do this? How do I do that? And the manager, being really busy, will quite often answer, well, you do it this way or you do that. But that kind of takes away a learning moment. And what they could do is say, that's a really good question. I have the answer. I have an answer for that. But tell me what you would have done if I wasn't here. And we'll find out. We help people really self-discover and really build their own capabilities and their own confidence by showing that they actually can get to the right answer on their own. And if they had the wrong answer, say, hey, that's really interesting. I'm just curious how you got there. You may find that you learned something by that. And then you can certainly share your perspective. So lots to learn here on actions, and many of these tied to coaching. Take us back to our agenda, setting clear expectations. So, we had this come up as one of the areas, and Lisa, you guys have a really nice model. It was a 5-part model, if I remember correctly. I'm looking at the next slide. It is a 5-part model. And I'm just wondering if you could just take us through, some of the work you've done around expectation setting.
Yeah, I'm happy to. There's a whole range of ways that you can look at setting expectations. There really is no one answer to how do you set expectations with your direct reports or your sales team. I mean, you can go from one end of the spectrum, which is just outright do it, tell them what to do, be very directive,
Mm-hmm.
to helping them set SMART goals. What I'll offer you today is a simplistic model here, a 5-step strategy that basically says it is a balance between competence and connection. So you'll see that coming through as I describe this to you. But essentially, you keeping the expectations that you set for your sales team a short list. Make it a short list. Less is more. But if you're giving them a whole host of priorities, then nothing is important because everything is important, right? So keeping it short, keeping it succinct, delivering with clarity is the distinction between telling your salesperson, grow your pipeline, to I want you to add 3 opportunities that are with a specific type of client that are total valued of X. Right. So just going from general, here's what I want you to do, to a very specific example of what you're expecting out of them is really important. And then the third piece around aligning the company needs with the salesperson's aspirations. I'm going to talk more about this later on in the webinar, but this is really about enlisting your salesperson in the conversation to say, well, what's important to you in your goals and what you're trying to achieve as a contributor in this organization, and then marrying that with where the company is trying to go. So I view this personally as super important to keeping that person engaged and an active and contributing member of the team. The fourth one here is about, everybody that is a sales leader has a regular cadence of meetings, one-on-ones, team calls, forecast meetings. But what's most important in this step is to keep that door open. I can tell you that the majority of my meetings happen in an unplanned fashion because the pace of the business, the requests that come from the customer base, they're not scheduled, and they certainly aren't following the schedule that I keep. So I need to make myself available to the sales team in an open door fashion so that I can be at the ready to help them with dealing with real-time issues with customers. And then lastly, this notion of having the right mix of activities and results. This isn't a new concept for any sales leader, but certainly one that continues to be important in terms of making sure that when you're working with your salesperson, it isn't all about just a bunch of activities, but it is also about getting those activities to drive results. Even today, I have members of the sales team that I work with that do an amazing job of building pipeline, getting a whole bunch of opportunities. And they get so immersed and excited about those opportunities that they're neglecting to ask the question of when can we bring this to close? So, so that it's important to strike that balance.
It's really interesting because we do see a lot of, where the pipeline actually is pretty robust, but we have a lot of stalled opportunities. And we often differentiate with kind of what I'll call in our pipeline management, we of course on managing the pipeline between active opportunities and stalled opportunities. Mm-hmm. And then there's, we call this science of pipeline management, which is what are all the different stages and the exit criteria. People seem to pretty much know that, may not always adhere to it, but they kind of know it. But they aren't really thinking about the art of pipeline management, which is really that kind of that fluid management you talked about in terms of the open door can really pay off in terms of strategizing. Let's have just a discussion about these accounts because it's in real time. What is it we can do to really advance the opportunity? And this balance between activities and results, I'll just share a little bit about how we think about and how we simplify that. So we have this very simple model. What are the desired results? And then it just, as Lisa mentioned, well, it's not just about the results. What are the specifics to achieve those results? What are the metrics? How are we going to measure success? And over what period of time? So whenever I think about a communication, I always like to test, does my communication include these these 4 elements? Does it have a result? Does it have the suggested behaviors to produce a result? Does it say how we're going to measure that? So if we're looking at pipeline growth, that would be a metric we could use. And over what period of time? So that we can be like over the next calendar quarter, over the next 30 days. So those are just 4 elements that we use to really, as Lisa said, I think it was on our first point, less is more, keep it really, really focused and clear. So just some takeaways. Next time you write an email and you think you're clear, maybe just test for these 4 elements. I think it really helps me a lot. Okay, so, sales management's not always easy. We have our top performers. We talked about some of the risks there. but we also have salespeople that underperform. But I don't think there's people who come to work every day and say, how can I underperform? I think they really do want to perform well. And, we use this, maybe this is an overused image, but I'm going to bring it up anyhow. I still like it and we still use it a lot, which is the iceberg. When someone's underperforming, it's not because they wanted to underperform. So we maybe see the gap. They were supposed to do $250,000 in business this quarter. They did $180,000. There's a $70,000 gap there. But what's the underlying reasons for the gain or gap? Is it something that was within their control, something that was outside of the control? There's generally not just one reason. Maybe the activities were lower than they should have been. It may have been something to do in the economy. So there's generally multiple gains or gaps that can, that we should think about. And it could be based on personal or professional issues. We often have, things that go on in our lives. All of us have, in the pandemic, really, we have childcare issues, we have personal issues, adult care issues, just depending on where you are, from in your life. And so there's all these things that happen. I'm not saying the manager should be a counselor. That's really more better referred, I think, to HR for help, but a good listener and really just understanding what the underlying causes are. Because if you don't understand the cause, you can't really help with the right management action. So when you understand the cause, there may be things you can help control, ways you can coach, and really isolate those areas that are within the salesperson's control. Alonzo, looks like we may have a question.
Yes, Olga is asking, how do you deal with negative opposition while we are on this topic?
And I want to just maybe elaborate. I think I know what Olga's saying. Let's say you have a salesperson who doesn't have as positive an attitude. They're kind of giving negative, kind of negative energy. So if that's what you're referring to, Olga, and if it's not, just go ahead and elaborate in the chat. But let's say you have some salespeople who are not bringing a positive attitude or negative. I think generally that gets to a management action called performance counseling. At that point, it's beyond coaching. I think you have to have a one-on-one discussion. Just say, hey, I've noticed that, particularly if it's been a change in behavior. If they've been consistently negative, you probably have the wrong salesperson. But let's say something changed. This was someone who was a really good performer, and generally they had a pretty positive attitude. And then all of a sudden you're starting to see, some negativity come in. You want to just say, you don't want to say, how come you have a negative attitude? That's only going to create resentment. But say, hey, I just wanted to have a conversation with you, really kind of understand, what we're trying to really focus on here. Our team has a number of challenges going on. We want to try and just have a really positive, upbeat culture. Sounds to me like you may have a couple of things that you want to discuss. But that's really where one-on-one performance counseling comes in. And again, I think it still points to the slide. See if you can get to the causes, maybe something going on in their life that has nothing to do with work. If people have health challenges, whatever, there may be a number of reasons people could have lower energy or negative energy. Just try and understand what they are. And then let them know that, from a workplace standpoint, we really need to keep it upbeat. We want to make it a positive experience for that person and for the entire team.
Yeah.
Lisa, what would you add to that? You do a lot of work on empathy.
Yeah, I do. I love what you had to say there about getting underneath the surface to really understand what might be driving that behavior and that attitude. The one thing that I would add to your advice there is to say that kind of, if it's truly negativity that is unchangeable, not the result of a temporary situation, either at home or whatever it might be, that can be really contagious and can really sort of come across to the rest of the team and poison the team's attitude and the energy toward getting to results. So my one encouragement would be to get into that pretty quickly.
I think so. These type of issues normally don't get better on their own. So there's going to need to be some kind of management intervention. And I think you just do it in a very professional, very polite, professional way, but also be very clear as a manager as to why you need to have a positive workplace environment for that person and for the entire team.
Yeah.
Alonzo, were there any other questions? Or Olga, I just want to make sure we answered your question. So hopefully we answered your question.
Yeah, I saw her write, yes, thank you.
Okay, terrific. Thank you for participating. If there's other questions, just put them in the chat and we'll also have some time afterwards. We have a question for you though. So what do you guys see as the causes of low performance? Love to get your participation in the chat. So it's our turn to ask a question. What do you see as causes of low performance based on maybe sales teams, either your own team or teams you've had exposures to in the past? Lisa, we're waiting for chaps to pop up. Okay, we've got a few. So belief systems, maybe they don't share your beliefs. Confusion, so a lack of clarity, lack of communication, the vision, they don't understand the bigger picture, so they really don't, not at the right skill level, so they don't have the right skills to really sell in today's buying environment. Again, selling value is really important, having salespeople who have the right skill or help them develop the right skill. Competitive environment, inability or maybe refusal to ask for help, so they're trying to do it on their own, and team selling is so important these days. Lack of ambition, maybe self-limiting, they're not really understanding how good they could be. They don't, again, kind of along the same lines. Poor motivation. Olga's putting in here self-regulating difficulties. That kind of ties to your question, how they manage their time. Actualization and sales techniques, breakthrough. These are really good. These are really good. We need to capture the chat so we could kind of put in the greatest hits. I think we have the making of a great blog post here, Alonzo, on underlying causes based on user-generated or participant-generated content. Really nice stuff. Lisa, what else are you seeing?
Yeah, one of the things that I was alluding to earlier is that the low performance may not be a personal skill issue. It could be, as you were mentioning, some of the surrounding circumstances that are driving that low performance. I've seen in instances where some of the issues that the organization is wrestling with in terms of resource management, turnover, supply chain issues have drawn the salesperson in to spend more time with their customers that they currently have so that they don't lose them. And that's caused them to not cultivate new opportunities, and therefore they're underperforming. Good reason for not performing, but you have to get behind what's causing that low performance, as you said.
All right, really appreciate all the ideas. Just a couple others I'm seeing. Inability to drive through objections, that gets to a skill level. Lack of trust. We talked about trust earlier, the trust between the manager, and we have a little exercise we do in our sales coaching program, things that build trust and things that erode trust. Be very interesting on your own time. Just take a piece of paper and put on one side things that you can do to build trust and things you might do intentionally or unintentionally that can erode trust, and then try and really focus on the things that can build trust. Once you've lost trust, it's very hard, very, very difficult to regain trust. So focus on, what you can do to build trust. Moving on with our agenda, thank you again for the participation in the chat. Phenomenal. We've talked a couple of times about behaviors versus results. I'm going to bring up a very simple description here. Results are measurable outcomes. I like to think about this as things you could take a picture of, like a snapshot. You just take a photo. That's a result. Percentage of quota, number of calls someone made. Those are things that are kind of static. Behaviors are things that you would videotape, actions you can take to achieve results. And the interesting thing that I think I mentioned earlier is that results are kind of backwards looking. They're things that have already happened. So because they've already happened, you can't manage results. You can help manage future results by really focusing on the behaviors. So oftentimes these are called in organizations KPIs, the key performance indicators, the key actions you can take to drive results. And Lisa and I, Alonzo, collaborated the other day. We came up with a brand new example, ties to a new course we have on modern prospecting, on what you could do to schedule more meetings. Because this is often, particularly for teams that have business development reps or even full cycle sales reps, are saying, hey, we need new opportunities, we need new customers. How are we going to do that? So just saying I want you to schedule 15 new meetings in Q4 doesn't mean we're going to have 15 meetings in Q4. That's the goal. What are some of the behaviors? So who are those target accounts? Did we research the accounts? Did we qualify ICPs? ICP is an acronym for Ideal Client Profile. Are we reaching the right people within those accounts? Are we finding ways to engage them so that they're receptive to taking a meeting? And then there's the quantity part, so these are all things that get to the quality, but then we actually have to make the contacts. And, 7-8 years ago, this might have said call activity levels, but it's not just phone calls or voicemails. It's emails, it's LinkedIn messages, it's social, it's videos. It's really multimodal prospecting. But these would be an example of behaviors that would drive more meetings. And I'm curious, Lisa, from your experience, what do you think are some of the more challenging parts if you're looking at, let's say a new person, let's say you added a new person to your leadership development team and you wanted them to build a book of business, which of these are some of the ones that are maybe the most challenging?
Yeah, I would say the first two, Norman, and I'll tell you why. The last three are less time consuming. And so the identification of target accounts, typically, at least in the sales teams that I've managed, you have either a territory, right? A salesperson's got a territory, which gives them unlimited number of accounts within that geography, or they have a named account list. And oftentimes those named account lists are quite long. And so the desire is to hold on to everything. It's just the natural tendency that the salesperson has. I don't want to give up any of my accounts. So by identifying target accounts, I'm sort of saying to you, I don't need these others. So there's sort of that underlying tension for them, but it's also time consuming. And the researching of accounts is also a big part of that. I see salespeople prepare and research about their accounts minutes before they're getting on a phone call. And that's never the best way to come at it.
You're never going to have really good insights too if you don't really prepare and you see what's going on within the company, what's going on with their priorities, are they talking about in their press release. That level of relevancy is really what gets to number 4, engaged prospects. When I think about what you just said about the target accounts and the researching, I think about the model you shared with us, the 5-step model. Less truly is more, because what we don't want to try and do is boil the ocean. We want to focus on a meaningful number of accounts. So just taken back to your less is more. And I believe that's true as it relates to prospecting.
I agree.
So I know as we're coming up against our time limit, we try and run these for about 45 minutes. Then we try and take some additional questions and wrap up. But I do want to talk a little bit about motivating salespeople in a hybrid world. And there's some great research that GP Strategy has done. It's called the X model. And I'm going to let Lisa start there because I hadn't seen this before. I just actually learned about this about a week and a half ago when I was talking to Lisa and we were prepping for the webinar. And Lisa, do you want to explain this? Because I think it's really, really insightful.
Sure. Thank you, Norman. So I offer this to you as a visual. It does come from many years of research about what makes for an effective leader, be they in a sales role or other capacity. But if you think about this in terms of a way that you can better understand how to drive an engaged workforce or motivated workforce. The important thing to know is if you look down in the lower left-hand corners that every single day as a leader in the organization, your organization wants you to drive toward the success of that organization as they have defined it through their values, goals, and their business strategy. Equally, an employee within the organization that is reporting to you is showing up to work every day with their own personal aspirations and goals for defining their personal success that come from their personal values, their personal aspirations, and their own ideas for how they're going to achieve those goals. And these two mutual desires, they intersect on the job, in the role. So when you as a leader are working with that individual, your opportunity to get them to that apex, as we refer to it, to that most engaged level or most motivated level, which suggests that they're highly satisfied in their jobs and they're giving you maximum contribution in their role. That's nirvana right there. You're creating great days at work for the individual, as we say it, and you're getting maximum results from them. If you're short of that, you could have everything from on the lower end of that triangle in the middle, not triangle, but that diamond in the middle, a disengaged employee, to someone on the left-hand side of the model being perhaps new to role, perhaps not upskilled, not giving you full contribution, but is really excited about their job. Or on the other end of directly across, maybe they're contributing a whole lot, but they're not highly satisfied. They're likely to be burned out in time because they're giving, but not getting. So it's important to just kind of use this model to say, how do I intersect with my employee? How do I think about what their personal needs and aspirations are and align that to where the organization is trying to go so we can get to that apex and get maximum engagement and motivation from our employees.
Yeah, I love that because when I look at that little shaded area on engage, I think about maximum satisfaction, maximum contribution. And it also reminds me that when I think about so as a manager, we're always driving towards organizational success because we've got our goals. We have, we report up, if I'm a leader of sales, I may report up to a senior leader of sales or a CRO. And we have all this accountability, but we also have to remember that motivation is very personalized. And I'll just share with you a very simple acronym. called motive, which ties to motivate.
Mm-hmm.
For some salespeople, and it's always personalized. Maybe they want to earn more money. They may have taken on additional expenses. Maybe they bought a new home and all of a sudden their cost of living has gone up because they have mortgage payments to make. For some people, it's about growth in the organization, career opportunity. Some people really thrive on working for a team, so keeping them connected to other people, not as easy when working in a hybrid model. Other people highly value their independence. They feel like they're doing their best work when they have a lot of autonomy. Some people love visibility. Other people, it's really just about doing a great job. They really value excellence. And so as a manager, you want to manage people consistently, but you also want to understand and take the time to talk to them, really understand what's important to them. So as you're thinking about the model that Lisa just shared, you can really think about, their personal values, their goals, their strategy, and making sure you're making it meaningful to them, because that's where you get to this intersection of really the engaged team members. So really excited about that. I want to share some key takeaways and then turn it back to Alonzo, and we'll talk a little bit about some next steps and also try and answer any remaining questions. Again, I want to thank all of you for attending, but just a couple of key takeaways. Current economic conditions are driving a more intense focus on productivity. So companies are being asked, or organizations are being asked, to do more with less. We hear that a lot. In fact, what Lisa was saying, could be resulting in some of the great resignation. Focus on leading indicators of performance. Really think about what are those behaviors that drive results. Culture of accountability requires clear communication, ongoing support. Lisa mentioned the open door and follow-up. And managers should personalize their feedback because people have different motivations and really align with individual motives. So you want to think about what you need to accomplish organizationally and how you can tie each person in